Good morning, everyone. Hello, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are live once again with our Friday morning coaching here on Octopi Poker. So thank you for joining me, everybody. And today we are going to be continuing with what we started last time. We're going to be going through the remainder of our 150K final table from Triton JG 2. So back in September this year. We're going to be using the vault to dive into looking at some of the hands, reviewing some of the sims, and seeing how this tournament played out. So we're going to go through it at a bit of a quicker pace than before, but thankfully we are now down to six-handed play, and we're not going to have as much complexity for some of the spots going forward. So we're going to see some bust outs, we're going to see some big pots, some high EV pots in ICM value, and we're going to see a winner at the end, of course, as well. So without further ado, let me switch to the view that you guys actually need to see. Forgot to do this last time, but thankfully we did not forget this time. And what we're going to do is just kind of recap where we were at. We had this hand happen where we get the ace king open, we get the pocket jacks shoving in the big blind, and ace king does win the flip, and we get a double up for Ye Wang right there. We're going to keep moving through the hands, like I say, fairly swiftly here. Make sure we don't get too bogged down in some of the hands where there's not really a ton of action. We get the ace-king suited here, opening. Just a fairly straightforward one right there. We're going to keep moving on. This one's interesting. We get an open from Jason with the ace-8, and then we get a big blind 3-bet. I think we actually did cover this hand last time, so I think we were actually slightly further on than this. Let me just make sure. If you guys were here last time, hopefully you can kind of let me know. I think we did look at this spot potentially as well. Fours and ace queen. I think we did cover that one. And we do have, I think what happened was we got to a point where we realized it was going to be a while before the next bust out. So we kind of, wrapped it up a little bit earlier. So we'll keep moving on. And I think we're going to go through, a few kind of fairly straightforward spots. We've got this pocket aces hand here that we did see as well. If we skip forward just a little bit, we're going to go to hand number 42-ish. At this point, I think this is about where we started, because we have this ace-jack. That open gets through from Mario Mosbeck. Jason on the button with the king-queen, another fairly trivial one. So nothing really too much happening. We're going to move forward through to where Samuel Muller is going to bust in 6th place here. Now, our situation that ends up with him busting is just a fairly straightforward shove spot right here. It's going to be pocket threes in the hijack here for 9 bigs, just shoving. Probably going to be relatively straightforward. Ooh, it's not. Okay. That's interesting. It's actually not a clear shove. It's not a pure shove. We do have pocket threes as a fold right here, which is a little surprising. And interestingly, there is quite a bit of Samuel's range that wants to use this 4.5 big blind sizing. So put in half of his stack and then give himself some opportunity to fold if multi-way action does happen behind him. So very interesting to see that. Not necessarily the optimal approach with the threes here, but it is losing maybe less than 1,000 here. It's losing about $900 or something, which in a 150K buy-in, pretty small portion of a buy-in, so can't really fault it too much. He does run into aces, which actually takes the click back reshove option here. It looks like that's not necessarily favorable because aces does prefer to just call, but doesn't really make a huge difference. And Mario is going to take that one down. So we do have our 6th place finisher right there. We're going to move on a couple more hands right here. And we're going to move to this one, which is just a walk. Let's actually just skip over some of these spots that are not very interesting. We'll go straight to the next bust out, which is going to be Jason Kuhn in 5th place. Now, obviously, Jason, one of the absolute elite of the elite out there, not a player that we would expect to be uncomfortable in this environment by any means. So a lot of the plays that he's going to make are going to be pretty much the right ones. And as you can see here, with 5 bigs, 10-5 off, he ends up just getting it in blind on blind. Does get called by the king 5 suited and does end up losing. So if we look at Jason's strategy right here, in the small blind. As you can see, 10, interesting. 10-5 off is a limp here. It's limping 3/4 of the time, but shoving is not actually ideal. It is actually just outside of the shoving range. So 10-6 off would be making about 7K as a shove. 9-6 off, making about 3K. 10-5 off, though, slightly losing. So about 1% of a buy-in of a negative EV margin here. So not a play that we can really criticize heavily, especially when we consider the shoving range or the calling range that's supposed to exist here. The big blind is supposed to call off with hands like Jack 6 off, Queen Deuce off, Jack Deuce suited. So if we expect even a slight overfold from the big blind here, then it's very likely that that 10-5 off could become a profitable shove. So I don't think it's that feasible to criticize the shove too much here. I don't think we can really be excessively critical of it. But it did end up in a position of putting Jason out of this tournament, and we do go through to 4-handed play. So this is really going to give us more of a chance to focus on some of the specifics of these spots. We do have one fairly obvious big stack here, which of course is Ye Wang at 45 bigs. And the shortest stack being about 11 bigs here, both of these stacks, either side of the chip leader being about 11 bigs, is going to present some pretty tricky ICM scenarios for particularly Mario Mosbeck in the big blind here. So it's going to be really interesting to see how his strategy evolves as we continue through this final table with him in a lot of pretty awkward spots. And if we look at this initial first 4-handed situation here, this is a great example of that, because we have Ye Wang with ace-jack offsuit on the button. He's going to open, and if we actually look at his strategy, he does have quite a few shoves here, but ace-jack off is a little bit too strong to be in that shoving range. Not really any need to just rip it there, so very reasonable open from him. Yu Zhang is going to fold the small blind with the 8-7 suited, which of course is very reasonable as well. And then Mario in the big blind is going to have the ace-7 suited. Now this is a hand that has no real incentive to 3-bet here, just wants to play pure call. You can see that the call is doing substantially better than any of the 3-bet sizes here that he has available to him. So in the end, not really too much reason to do anything different. But if you look at his overall construction, you can see he does have a shoving range with a lot of these jacks through 8s, ace-jack through ace-king off shoving, some deuces, some offsuit ace-x. So fairly straightforward shoving range in terms of mostly being hands that are prioritizing getting folds. But then on top of that, we have this polar non-all-in 3-bet range where he's making it 6.3 with this range of some offsuit bluffs and a lot of queens plus ace-jack suited type of hands. So interesting strategy, pretty consistent with what we would expect in a lot of ICM spots. And if we look at what happens post-flop, we're going to have an interesting spot develop here as well. So if we move over to the post-flop sim side of the vault, you can see that this queen, queen, 4, 2 spades is a pretty clear range check for Mario, even though his range is tighter than it normally would be for a big blind defend here in chip EV. It's clearly going to be a board that is not particularly good for his overall range. Sorry, need my coffee. And then when it gets to Ye Wang, he has a pretty clear range bet for a small size here. This being a paired board with a high card being paired, it's usually going to be a very good situation for his range. It's going to be one that allows him to just bet everything for that small size and get a lot of folds. And in this particular case, he does come with, he comes with a check. Wow. All right. Didn't expect that. I thought this was going to be a spot where he would just come with the range bet. I did not think he would miss that one, but he does miss it. So this is where we start to go off the rails a little bit, guys. We're into the sort of the land of ICM creativity here, really, where we have a line developing that is not supposed to exist. We're not supposed to see this, right? We're not supposed to ever see this line go check, check. And when this happens, you really have to think carefully about the type of range construction that the opponent's going to have here, because one of two things is likely to happen when they are checking back on a board that shouldn't have any check backs. Either they are overestimating how strong the big blind's range is on this board, which might mean that they do have a reasonably balanced checking back range, or they simply are playing a little bit more face up, where a lot of their checkbacks are going to be the exact type of hand that you would expect them to be, which is a lot of medium strength type hands. It's not that likely to see, for example, an excessively strong or excessively weak checking back range. It's usually either going to be somewhat balanced, or it's going to be very condensed into that region of hands that is mostly middle strength. In this case, with the king turn being a card that I would expect is probably going to help that checking back range at least a decent amount. Wouldn't expect to really see any aggression from Mario here. The turn here does exist here, so that we are able to view what the turn looks like in this scenario. But I think it's a product of a somewhat sort of artificial range here for the checking back range from in position, since that is a 100% bet on the flop there. So I wouldn't really pay too much attention to what the actual turn situation looks like here, because we're looking at a very sort of unsolved situation. It does go check, check again, and then we get this river queen, and we go check, check a third time. Now, in practice here, I definitely think it would be reasonable for ace-jack to value bet on this river, because it's really quite tricky to imagine Mario having too many hands that are better than ace-high here. So we do see a bit of a passive line from the chip leader here, but overall, you can kind of understand where it came from. He mostly just has ace high, so maybe we can understand that one. But nevertheless, he does maintain that chip lead and doesn't really put enough pressure, or doesn't really put any pressure on Mario here. So let's move on, and we're going to continue with this four-handed dynamic here. This next hand is going to feature... Oops, did not mean to click that button. Let's go back. This next hand is going to feature another open from Ye Wang right here. And the interesting thing about this one is I would not be shocked if this actually features some jams. Yeah, okay. Wow. So he has tons of jams here. Lots of jamming, especially with this exact hand. So raise is good, but he has so much ability to apply ICM pressure here to these three players behind that he truly has a lot of opportunity to just jam with a lot of hands. Mostly the stuff that is going to play pretty well if it gets called, but isn't going to be in great shape if it gets shoved on after raising. So he does min-raise the Jack-9 suited, which is still making money, but not as much as it would do as a shove. Then we see Mario in the small blind with the ace-king off, just shove all in. And as you can tell, going to be pretty reasonable to shove there. He's making about 57K-ish. Oh, sorry, that's the 3-bet. He's making about 60K, almost 61K just shoving here. So very clear, very reasonable shove in this spot from Mario. Not too much to say there. However, it is interesting to consider what would happen if the cutoff shove did come in and we then had Mario in the small blind with his ace-king. So let's take a look at that part of this strategy. Now, the risk premium here for Mario is going to be very high. If we look at what happens after this shove, risk premium over here, 16.4% for Mario. And when button folds, he does call off with ace-king off, but it is actually pretty close. 5% folds in there, so there is a tiny shred of some folding. And he calls off with 9s plus because he dominates a lot more hands with the 9s plus with the pocket pairs. But he prefers to have ace-jack suited, doesn't love having ace-king off. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's actually only a certain amount of ace-x in the shoving range, right? A lot of the shoving range is stuff that's very, very live against ace-king. You've got a lot of these queen-high suited hands, jack-high suited hands, pocket pairs, and so on. So definitely kind of makes sense here that ace-king would be in slightly worse shape than some other hands. And in particular, you can also see that ace-queen and ace-jack are actually doing slightly better as a byproduct of the fact that they are dominating some of these queen high suited and jack high suited hands a little bit more often. So that's quite interesting right there. So very straightforward spot for Mario right there. And we do see a shove and a pot won by him. So he's chipping up just a little bit. The next hand that we're going to move into, we do have a button open. Oh, we don't have a button open. Okay, Mario does fold the button here. I would have probably expected an open, but it could be just a collision effect thing with the small blind being short. Could simply be that the small blind being short does kind of mean that when Mario folds, small blind is going to bust quite a bit. He's going to shove. He's going to get called by the big blind. So if we look at the full sim, let's take a look at Mario's range right here. Oh, end of pre-flop. We don't want that. We want fold. Oh, that's the wrong node. Huh, okay, fold there. All right. This is Mario's range. So there is a 2.5 big blind open with the ace-5 off at a mixed frequency there. So he is doing some opening with that hand. Definitely surprising to see some shoves in there, but does make sense since the big blind is going to have a pretty tough time calling off against it. But yeah, the ace-5 off is pretty borderline there. So interesting to see him fold it. But we do move on. This one, probably pretty straightforward. We've got a small blind shove from the chip leader and the big blind folds king-4 off. I do think this is probably closer than you might think, given how wide the chip leader can shove. Yeah, you can see king-6 off would be a call. So king-4 off folding here obviously makes sense, but it would be pretty important to consider that as the 9 big blind stack here, king high is in fairly good shape against that shoving range. So interesting spot and one that we would expect to maybe see a fold, but also if we were a couple of pips higher, we might see a call. So, oops, we're just going to move on beyond this hand, move on to the next hand. We've got a pocket threes on the button here. I would be very surprised if this is not shoving in the GTO sim. Yeah, threes is jamming. So threes is definitely strong enough to just rip here. Even for 26 against the big blind, you just have so much fold equity. So would prefer to see the button shove there with the chip lead, but he does get the raise through anyway. I'm going to skip on a few more hands just to make sure we can get everything covered so that I don't think there's too much eventful stuff going on here. We have seen the stacks even out just a little bit. The short stacks kind of taking a couple of chips away from Mario. So at this point, we have a general stack layout where we've got the chip leader, obviously, with 45, and then we've got 3 short stacks against each other. So what we have is a scenario where, because the 3 short stacks are quite even, they're basically going to have pretty similar risk premiums against each other. And then they're all going to have a much higher risk premium against the button. So it's a pretty decent rule of thumb there to recognize that when the stacks are close together, you know, the risk premiums are going to be close together. So there's going to be a pretty significant level of sort of mutual ICM pressure there. Now, there is a slight difference here, of course, because Mario does cover the other 2. He covers them by a few big blinds, but at a final table, even a few big blinds does make a difference. Wouldn't expect to see much action here. Yep, just a walk for Mario in the big blind. Yu Zhang is going to fold the button. Mario is going to jam with the king-queen off in this one. That I would expect to be good. Oh, okay, so king-queen off is actually a small raise here. It looks like I would expect that's probably just because it does have the ability to get some action from some dominated stuff if it raises that might fold if it shoves. So kind of interesting there. This is the call-off range. You can see definitely could shove king-queen off because we're clearly getting called by worse. So either way, can be fine there. Mario on the button with the ace-10 here. This is a really interesting spot, and it wouldn't shock me kind of whatever way he goes with this. He might shove. He might just min-raise. It looks like the strategy is kind of mixed with his range, but as you can see with this individual hand, he actually does have a very strong incentive to just shove. The min-raise is going to be profitable. 23K in profit, but The shove is making about an extra 2K just to apply max pressure to that chip leader here. This is a great example of one of those hands that isn't going to be in a particularly good spot post-flop if it gets flatted, but it's also not going to easily be able to call off if the big blind shoves. He does get flatted. Oops, excuse me. Sorry, guys. Managed to hit the mute button before I sneezed, so I apologize for that. All right, so we do get flatted in the big blind by the chip leader. You can see Jack 8 off is in there. It's actually 3-betting sometimes, but flatting is going to be good. If we move to the flop, we've got no donking for chip leader. This is not a good enough board to donk. And we got a very interesting flop strat for Mario here. He actually has some shoves. He has some 3x pot all-in shoves here on this flop. Now, that is very much a strategy that I wouldn't expect to see from players here, but it does make sense given that he's in a position where he has a strong incentive to deny some equity to the big blind here. He does have a good chunk of overpairs in his range that are fairly keen to just take pots down. And he's got a high risk premium. He has a strong incentive not to put himself at risk as much. And he also has to, of course, have some bluffs in there, which is why he's shoving with some of these overcards that have a spade in them. But it is a very interesting strategy here. He does also have a little bit of some small betting, but this ace-10 off, as you can see, is not part of his range, so it's very difficult for us to figure out what we're supposed to be doing with this hand. Hey, Mathol, welcome in the chat. Thanks for being the first one in the chat this week. Appreciate you for being here. So yeah, interesting spot. He does find a check back. Ace-10 suited is checking back a decent amount here. So not really likely to be a huge mistake with ace-10 off by any means. The 5 of hearts comes on the turn. I would expect to see some donking here or some betting here from Ye Wang with this hand. Does have the 8 of hearts out there. Let's take a look. Jack 8 off. Yep, Jack 8 off, definitely betting at a pretty decent rate here. This size is pretty reasonable. Could maybe go a bit bigger. But he does bet and he does get a fold from the ace-10 there. So interesting spot. Chip leader takes down another one. And we're back to this situation with 3 short stacks and a lot of ICM pressure on all of them. Now, as you can see from the stack map at the bottom right here, we've got a scenario where the chip leader is kind of just chipping down and down and down and down, right? And there's also not a lot of big pots taking place. So you've got this sort of equaling out of the stacks as time goes by, as we get towards this higher pressure point in the event. And you can really see it kind of comes to a head here because we get back-to-back bust outs. So we're going to move on to just looking at a little bit further on in this final table. And we're going to see how this progression keeps developing as chip leader slightly starts to lose his advantage. Now here we have Mario with the shortest stack at this point. Kaihan here on 9.5 still hanging around. And chip leader on the button. He is going to min raise the 9-7 off, which might be a little loose, but might be okay. Okay, so 9-7 is actually mixing jams and min raises, so it's fine. 9-6 would be on the borderline as a min raise, but 9-7 is going to do okay. So he's still able to keep applying that pressure here. But he is starting to slightly chip down just a little bit as the blinds go up. Now with pocket 8s here on this next hand, okay. I was going to say I would expect to see some jams. But no, actually 8s is a min raise here. Jamming 8s here probably not necessary. So fairly reasonable min raise just to call off against anybody, I would think. The Queen 10 off does fold. And then Jack 9 off in the big blind actually comes with a defend. Now this is going to be quite interesting because it would not shock me if this is actually a little bit too wide. Okay, we're right at the bottom, right? Jack 9 off is actually a pretty comfortable call here, but Jack 8 off would be quite a big loss. So it's pretty close. It's surprisingly close. And you can see that even though big blind would normally be calling a super wide range with only 7 big blinds in their stack, they aren't able to do that here, right? They aren't able to do the same thing because of the fact that there's so much risk premium placed on them. So they do go to a flop, and if we look at the post-flop sim on this King 3, well, clearly it's a board that is not great for the big blind, but they actually do have some suited King X in their range here, so probably not as bad as it might seem in some cases. The c-bet size that's going on for the chip leader is basically just a fairly standard one big blind c-bet. Can't go any smaller than that, obviously. And facing that size here, which is the size that does come in, the big blind is now obviously going to be under some pressure with a hand like Jack 9 off. They're not going to really be able to continue with that hand. If we look at the response, look right here, it does include a couple of traps. Not a lot of check calling though. Queen 3, Jack 3, just about able to do that. Pocket sevens is in there, low frequency. There's some other stuff like some flush draws and things, but generally the big blind is going to prefer to do a lot of raising or folding here. And in fact, the specific hand that they have actually does raise 31% of the time. So it is a hand that can kind of bluff raise to some degree here, but pretty tough to really imagine many people finding the bluff raise there. So quite interesting to see that. Anyway, we're now moving on. And of course, we have a very short stack now in the form of Kaihan. He's at 4.4 big blinds here in the small blind. Now, the next one, we see this min raise with the King Jack offsuit from the cutoff. And this is quite a curious one because he is under a ton of pressure here, but he has a pretty big incentive to just do a lot of jamming. And the min raise range is not very substantial. Now, the reason for this is because when he does min raise, the problem that he's facing is the big blind is the chip leader. And when he min raises, he still gets defended quite a lot. He gets defended about 30% of the time by the chip leader. And of course, he gets clicked back to 4 big blinds about 20% of the time as well. So in the end, what happens is the min raise just doesn't actually get through very often. And it's not favorable for him to play post flop against chip leader in this case. Now, what I think could be an option for him here, we don't have it in the sim, but it would be pretty reasonable for him to raise to something like 5 bigs here to pretty much price himself in against the short stacks. But if there's three-way action, maybe he can get away from it. Or, maybe he makes it 3.5 or 4 or something like that. But it's not in the sim, so we don't know for sure yet. Just an important and interesting kind of a consideration there. Does fold around, and chip leader actually folds as well, and he does take it down with a min raise. So moving forward again, we've got these micro stacks now. Kaihan on the button does make it 3.25 with Queen Jack offsuit. And if we look at the sim for this one, you can see that 3.25 is used. It's definitely better than the 2x. However, it's not really used with Queen Jack. It's pretty close, but it's not really used there. He does get through. So lots of micro stack action going on here. Chip leader on the button folds the Queen 7 off. As you can see, that is definitely pretty tight. He actually can raise to 2.75 here with that, just to give that big blind a little bit of a harder time defending. Probably can't really shove easily, but the shove actually would make money here, so definitely a spot where we would not expect the chip leader to fold that hand. The small blind does shove with the 5-4 offsuit, and as you can see, the shove here is basically coming with almost everything. 5-4 off very much in there, and the Jack 6 off does fold. Now, the folding with the Jack 6 off is actually a little bit of a mistake, crazily enough. This call off would be making about 19K in EV, so pretty surprising to see that fold come in there. But, of course, it is pretty hard to call off your tournament with Jack 6 off in spots like that. Now, button here against the 2 tiny stacks, we would definitely expect to see a shove with King Jack. Pretty trivial right there. So really curious to see some of these micro stack spots and how extreme some of the strategies get here. Mario on the button with 3.7 bigs and pocket deuces. Let's see where he goes with this. If we look at the sim, the pocket deuces, surprisingly, and this is actually something I don't want to blow my own horn too much, but I did kind of expect this might happen, which is that 3s and deuces are folds. And a lot of that is going to have to do with how little fold equity Mario has. And the type of equity that threes and deuces are actually going to have when they get all in. They're basically never realistically going to be able to be dominating very many hands, and that makes it unfavorable for Mario to actually get them in here when he doesn't really have a lot of fold equity and the risk premium is very high. So he does get it in, but this is actually a slight error, and as you can see, it's actually losing about 22k here to get it in with deuces. Chip leader calls off, but the deuces do hold and in fact make a set, so Mario doubles up. So again, we are back to some really shallow stack play, and with the blinds going up now, Ye Wang is down to about 27 big blinds, so some real micro stack dynamics going on here. The fold from Mario in the cutoff with the 10-7 is very reasonable. Kaihan on the button with the 6-5 has a pretty clear fold, as you can see, losing 25k to get it in there. And then small blind actually does limp here. This is kind of a curious one. He's not really supposed to have any limps, and 9-5 off is right on the cusp between being able to just shove and then being able to make it 3.5 as a larger raise size. So surprised to see a limp. Post flop, it does just go one big blind and fold. So not too much going on there. We're getting closer to this point where we're going to see a couple of bust outs. So let's see how this develops. Pocket eights is going to shove in the small blind, and queen 10 suited is going to call it off. And Mario actually does win this one. And if we look at the small blind strategy right here, you can tell that clearly the pocket eights is very reasonable to get it in with. But in fact, it actually does better as a small raise here. So has a little bit of incentive to just kind of encourage Mario to get it all in himself, more so than doing a lot of shoving. When Mario does get shoved on, of course, queen 10 suited is going to call. He's making 114k calling that off, so completely reasonable with that one. And he does win the flip, and now Mario has our second place stack again. Now, Kaihan is really shallow here in the big blind at 2.4 bigs. If we fold it to Yu Zhang, he's going to shove with the ace-jack suited, and Kaihan is going to have to fold. So on the button with the ace-jack suited here, you can see shoving and just raising to 4 big blinds are both fine. Shoving slightly better, so all good there. And we're now getting to that territory where Kaihan is almost pretty much guaranteed to be forced all in the next couple of hands, but he does wake up with pocket jacks. Sorry, he wakes up with pocket kings and runs into pocket jacks. So he gets a really tiny double up. I'm actually very curious to see how wide he goes with it here. Okay, so he's supposed to go with 88% of hands here, so really, you know, not really too much to say about that. And of course, big blind calls off with everything. All right, so now Mario with 16 and pocket sixes. This one is actually a pretty tricky one. I think, yeah, okay. So sixes mixing jams and min raises here. You can see kind of a polar strategy with the min raise, but there's also some 2.5. So just sort of maybe kind of protecting himself against the small blind a bit, maybe just sort of giving himself or giving the big blind a little bit worse odds to call. So can kind of do a couple of different things here. He does shove, small blind folds, big blind folds. So once again, Mario takes down another pot. This one is going to be a shove from small blind and a queen 5 off fold. I imagine this is probably closer than it seems. So king 7 off is a clear shove here, very straightforward. Queen 8 off is a call, queen 5 off is a fold. So, you know, maybe, I mean, queen 5 suited would have been a call, right? So if we're suited, we call. If we have queen 8, we call. But otherwise, we're good with folding that one. So Yu Zhang now on the button with the ace 8 suited. He's going to rip it for 9 bigs, and Kaihan is actually going to call off with the king 9. This is an interesting one. So, button strategy right here. Ace 8 suited, ripping 9 bigs, completely fine. Doesn't need to do anything differently here. He can make it half of his stack for, you know, roughly the same EV, but shoving is also going to be good. And if we look at the big blind, king 9 off is actually a pretty clear call off here. He does have good enough equity. He is actually supposed to call off with stuff like 10-9 off even. 8-5 suited is mixing, queen 5 suited. So have to call off pretty wide here, even though we are the shortest stack. Very interesting spot, but he does call off and he wins. And now Kaihan is right back in it. So we've got another short stack now, or our shortest stack has changed from Kaihan to Yu Zhang. Chip leader Ye Wang is not as far ahead as he was. We've got a 10 deuce suited fold there in the small blind, which seems, I think, pretty reasonable. And now Mario is going to fold on this hand with the Jack 9 offsuit, which I think is entirely reasonable. And Kaihan on the button with the pocket eights is going to make it half of his stack. Now, this is a really interesting one. If we look at what he does here in the sim, he doesn't actually use the half stack at all. And I think the reason is because there isn't really any additional benefit to it above and beyond the min raise, considering how short the big blind is. Even if he made it 3 here, he would still be in a position where the big blind would be covered by that raise. So if the point is to just cover the big blind, he could make it anything from 2.7 or bigger. So it looks like it prefers the min raise here, but he does get shoved on by the ace jack suited, and he does end up being forced to call it off, even with the 1 big blind stack here. And in fact, he does double through the small blind here. So quite an interesting spot. Not an easy one to figure out, given that we don't have the 4 big blind raise really being used very much here. But nevertheless, it does work out in Kaihan's favor. And we do see a double up to the point where he is now, crazily, our chip leader. Next hand, we have the 1 big blind stack in the small blind here. And we've got Ye Wang on the button, making a min raise with the king 5 off. Now, in fact, that is actually a pretty good play here, mixing min raise and fold. And in the big blind, Mario is going to have to fold the 4 deuce off. And of course, the 8-4 off does have to fold there, despite the fact he only has 1 big. Now, an interesting consideration. Oh, what just happened there? Did he not fold? Let's go back. All right. I thought he folded. Raise. Fold. Yeah, of course. So it says fold. Okay. So I don't know what happened here. I think we might have had a... So 8-4 off is supposed to fold. I think what happened here, and this does happen sometimes on these streams, is that some of the hands can't be processed into the vault when some of the stacks are incredibly small, or if the stack sizes don't actually pop up on screen on the stream at any point. So we don't have the bust out hand for the 4th place finisher here, which was Yu Zhang, I believe. But we do have 3-handed play now. So make of that what you will. We are now down to a point where Kaihan has the chip lead with 22 bigs. Ye Wang has 11 in the big blind, and Mario Mosbeck on the button has about the same. Now, in this particular spot, 3-handed, Mario does have queen 10 off, and this is actually a min raise or fold situation. He does come with a fold. In particular, one of the things that's really good for him here is that when he does fold, small blind does this. Chip leader gets to shove super wide, and he's going to know this. He's going to know that him folding is going to be able to create more spots where the 2 players can get all in behind him. And of course, that's exactly what happens. We see the shove from the pocket 4s, the call off with the ace 9, both of which are completely reasonable. Pocket 4s making about 70k, 68k as a shove. Ace 9 off making about 89k as a call. So very, very clear shove and call from both players. And we do finally get to our heads up match. So now we have Mario Mosbeck against Kaihan Mokri in a heads up match. And Kaihan has gone from 2 big blinds or so, a few hands back, to now being in this heads up match. And spoiler alert, he is going to go on to win this tournament, as you'll see if you've checked out this tournament in the vault. So let's just quickly cover this heads up match. Let's skim through some of the hands and take a look at some of the spots that come up. This one, we get a limp, check, check fold. So pretty straightforward on that one. We're going to see any hands that come up that provide some significant action, and we're going to check them out. That 10-5 off limp fold to a shove from an offsuit ace seems very good. Shove and a fold here. A lot of pretty simple spots, as you can imagine. A shove from queen deuce off, call from 9-7 suited, and a double up. That seems good. Pocket 4s is going to shove. King deuce off is actually going to fold. This is quite interesting. This is our first one where I think Mario might be a little on the tight side. So king pocket 4s, clear shove here. King deuce off, though, however, is actually making about 6k as a call off. He is supposed to call every offsuit king here. Now, It's definitely debatable as to whether Kaihan is going to find all of these shoves on the button, but nevertheless, it's completely reasonable to think that King Deuce off would still be in fairly good shape as a calling hand. So definitely a little bit surprising to see him fold this one. Now, next one we have, once again, about 10 big blinds or so, and this time Mario comes with a limp on the button with the 9-4 suited, which, as you can see here, is very reasonable. We do get a check from the Jack-4. We get a check, a 1 big blind, and a fold. So nothing too eventful going on with that one. This one we get limp, shove, fold. So kind of the same sort of pattern here. Limp, check. Then we get a really interesting flop where Kaihan flops bottom pair and the nut flush draw. Mario is going to bet with the 10 deuce off. So let's go to the post-flop sim and check this one out. First of all, Kaihan does actually have some hands that just rip this flop for about 2x pot, which is a little surprising. Actually, it's more than that. It's much more than that. It's 4x pot. Wow, so he's got a tiny portion of some hands that just shove it for 4x pot. Very surprising, but it is in there. He does check, and then facing that check, Mario has quite a mixed range of bet sizes. He's got the 1 big blind, the 1.5, a little bit of the 2, so makes sense that that would be the case. Kaihan does come with a small raise here, and this particular combo isn't actually in his range at this point because ace-3, as you can see, is actually just going to be a shove pre, I think, versus the limp. So he's not really supposed to have this hand, not really supposed to have the nut flush draw at all here, but we do get a fold from Mario, and I think this is very reasonable. Just completely possible to imagine here that check raising the nut flush draw with bottom pair is going to be very reasonable. So I think we're all good from Kaihan's perspective there. This time, Kaihan shoves and Mario folds. Then we're going to get the shove from the king, a limp from the king, queen off, a check from Kaihan, check, 1 big blind, fold. So a very cagey heads up match so far. Both players kind of not putting a ton of money in the pot. No real big pots playing out. A lot of limp, check, fold, stuff like that. Check, 1 big blind, call with the king high flush draw here. Kaihan turns a 6. And we get a rivered flush for Mario. Kaihan does have the 6 of diamonds. And he actually ends up folding. This one's really interesting. Let's take a look at this. So we've got a very shallow stacked limped pot here where the checking range from Mario in the big blind isn't really supposed to have any king 7 in it. So not easy to say what he's supposed to do here. 6-4 off is a bet on the flop for Kaihan. Then we have a certain amount of some check calls with king high here on the flop for Mario, but also some check raises. If we go into, you know what, I'm actually going to open up the full post-flop sim here just to make sure that we can check this out in some detail. So we've got check on this board. We've got the B33. And then the raise here is a very small one, basically a min raise. And there is a little bit of some king high flush draw stuff in there, so that makes sense. Once it does go check, check, we've got that 6 of spades turn. Little tiny bit of donking there, which is kind of surprising. The 6-4 is a pure check on the turn, so that one is very logical for Kaihan right there. And then on this ace of diamonds river, let's take a look. I would suspect that any kind of flush here is going to be completely fine with jamming. Yeah, I mean, flushes are definitely jamming at some frequency, even though there's not many of them in there. And then facing the jam, 6-4 with the 6 of diamonds. It's a mix. Okay, so I thought it might be a little bit more than a mix. I thought it might actually be pure call here, just because of having that diamond blocker. But it is at least close. If we have 6-4 without a diamond, it's much more of a fold. But generally speaking, 6-4 with a diamond seems like it is kind of close. So we're going to go back and we're going to finish off this heads up match. So now we have a slightly more even distribution of stacks, but Mario is still only at about 10 big blinds. Very short stacked scenario here, but obviously this skill set of playing short stacked heads up is actually really valuable in tournaments. It's not something you can just gloss over and not pay attention to. If you don't play well heads up, you're going to really have a lot of problems when it comes to manifesting or maximizing your EV when you get to those late stages, because there's so much EV attached to heads up scenarios. So much EV comes from just being good heads up and recognizing where the spots are that we should be taking. So Kaihan does come with a min raise here now that we're about 13 bigs deep, and he just gets it through on the flop. He min raises the 9-3 off. Mario's going to fold the 6 deuce off there. Kind of becomes reasonable to fold some hands once you get down to about 12 bigs, even with big blind ante. He shoves the king 9 off. So a lot of limp shove, limp check. Mario's now going to find a c-bet on ace jack 4, and he does win. Kaihan limping the 5 deuce off. This might actually be a little too wide. Mario comes with the raise with pocket queens. Pocket 3s for Mario now. He's going to shove for 16. Let's check that one out. Yeah, pocket 3 is totally fine there. And then the king deuce suited fold also totally fine from Kaihan. So all in all, very good so far from both players. Now we have this one where Kaihan limps. Mario's going to check. It's going to go check, bet, call, turn 8, check, bet, and fold. So this one's quite an interesting one. Let's take a look at the strategies here. There is a little bit of donking on the flop for Mario here. It goes check, bet from 9-8, which is completely reasonable. King 9. King 9 isn't actually in range, so this is another one where he has a hand that he's not technically supposed to have, so it's pretty tricky for us to figure out what exactly he's supposed to do with it. But he does come with the call, and then on turn, a little bit of donking from him here as well, and the 9-8 is a pretty clear bet for Kaihan as well. Not seeing a ton of continues here. Well, actually, we are. We're seeing 35% folds, which is what we would expect, but we are seeing some pretty straightforward check jamming ranges, a lot of the combo draws, 2-pair type stuff. It's going to be pretty reasonable. And then we come to what I believe is our final hand, which is Mario jamming the button with the king 3 off, Kaihan calling and flopping trip 9s to leave Mario basically drawing dead. And if we look at this one, we can see right here that king 3 off is a very clear shove, and 10-9 suited is a very clear call for about a 50K, 58K rather, profit margin. So that brings us to the completion of this tournament. So congrats to Kaihan Mokri for taking this one down for a huge score. If we go back to the event, let's go back to the event that we were looking at, year 2025. It's this one right here. Yeah, so Kaihan took this one down for $3.835 million and $59. Mario Mosbeck, 3.067. Ye Wang, 1.8. 1.5 for Yu Zhang, Jason Kuhn 1.2, and so on. So really interesting final table there. A lot of micro stack action there once we got really, really shallow at the end. But a very interesting spot for all the players involved. Very interesting to see Kaihan take this one down after being incredibly shallow, down to about 2 big blinds at one point. And a great example of how we can use the vault here to improve our understanding of these final table spots, these ICM situations, these spots that are taking place in these high-end tournaments, very, very elite level play. But even within that context, you did see a couple of errors from some of the players here. So really interesting to see that, and certainly something we can all learn from. So with that, everybody, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you all being here. I know we're coming up on the holidays, so I hope everybody has a very good holiday period. As always, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and feel free to join us on our Discord server where we have the weekly challenges that are going to teach you guys a lot about how to use the trainer and how to drive your study processes in the right way. So thanks, everybody. Happy holidays, and I will see you all soon. Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate you being here. Take care, guys.